Hello, I'm Dr. Andrew Seeley, Director of the Institute for Catholic Liberal Education, and this is School Talk. And today we're going to be talking with Ben Faulk. He's the 6th grade teacher at St. Augustine Academy in Ventura, California. And I probably never told you this, but it was your reputation that got us to send our kids to St. Augustine in the 6th grade. We heard so many good things about your class, and Ben is going to talk to us today some about his way of approaching poetic memorization. And so I got the chance to sit in on your class the other day and saw you introducing the opening of the Iliad to your 6th grade students. Mm-hmm. So tell us about how you go about teaching them the Iliad so that they can memorize and recite.
Well, first of all, we have been reading the children's Homer, and the kids are the children's Homer, for those of you who don't know, is a collection of both the Iliad and the Odyssey written in a children's version, without all the blood and guts and the gore that are in the true Iliad. And so the kids are familiar with the story right now, and I decided I wanted the kids to have something from the Iliad that they can hold on to and retain in their knowledge, their background knowledge. And so what I decided to do a few years ago was to introduce, I was trying to find a section from the actual Iliad itself that would be good for the kids to have. And it settled, after discussing this with with a few other English teachers at the school, I decided just to settle with the first, probably the first 6 or 7 lines, or 8 lines possibly, of the introduction to the Iliad.
Yeah, it starts, sing goddess,
the
wrath of Achilles.
Yes, yeah. Exactly. So, and in that those first 8 lines of the introduction, it really gives the whole theme of what the story of the Iliad is about. And so that's what I wanted the kids to have. And so in the memorization of it, they already have an idea of what the story is about. So now I'm giving this to them as something that they can start to they can actually retain as part of the story. So they can go on in the future, possibly when they're in high school or something, in the rhetoric stage of their learning, and say, I remember when Mr. Faulk taught me.
And they do, too.
Yeah, they do. They do.
So you started out by just reading it aloud to them?
Yes. The actual poem?
Yes.
Or the beginning of
those
the
opening 8 lines?
Yes. I start out by reading it to them just so that they can see it. They all have a copy of it, which I've typed up for them, and I have some Greek pictures on it to make it look appealing. And from there, I read it, and then I start breaking down the sections of it so that they can actually see. Sing goddess. Well, who's the goddess? I thought we learned that this was Homer reciting this, or singing to a harp while it's being recited. So who's the goddess? So we go into, well, remember those are one of the 9 muses. And then we go into, the next line, titles of who the Greeks are, as the Greeks are fighting the Trojans, just to explain different elements of that complex first 8 lines.
I was very impressed with how well they seemed to be able to answer the questions. You'd ask them questions, what does this part mean? Who is Peleus?
Right. And
they seem to know that pretty well from their work with the children's Homer.
Exactly, right. So I think they've had their introduction to the story, and then here is something which they're going to be able to retain in their knowledge of the Iliad.
Okay, so you take the Iliad, you've taken it, you've modeled it by reciting it for them. You go over words and phrases, making sure they understand the meaning, connecting it with what they've read in the children's Homer and their knowledge of the Greek world they've been gaining. And then I saw how at the end of it you had the whole class read it together with you.
Yes.
Okay, so now they're prepared to go and memorize it. Now what's next?
In the memorization segment, I guess you could say, which is the real, that's where the rubber meets the road. At the beginning of the year, I give the kids some tools as to how to figure out how to memorize something. So I don't just hand them a big poem and just say, "Okay, guys, you're on your own." So basically, just like memorizing anything, and we do a lot in the 6th grade, I tell the kids the way to look at this is just take it in small chunks at a time. So normally I'll begin the year memorizing just one stanza of something, and then we grow from there. And in memorizing a stanza or so, what I first do is you can just go line by line. And so I tell the kids, read the first line, and then read the first line, and now read the second line, and then read the first, the second, and the third line, and build on that until you go possibly read through the section that needs to be memorized. And then go back to the top, read the first line. Now cover it up. Can you recite that from memory? And then if you can't, then you need to reread it. And then so reread it and then cover it up and see if you can recite it. And once you have the first line, then move on to the next. So just baby steps, moving through there, trying to accomplish the larger tasks of memorizing it. Another way that a teacher at our school has the kids memorizing is to approach the poem or whatever the chunk of information is that needs to be memorized, and take it to the first punctuation mark, whether that be a comma, a period, exclamation point, question mark, etc. And so, for instance, when we do during my section on the Romans, when we do the Friends, Romans, Countrymen, Mark Antony's speech, there might be a comma right after friends. So you would begin it saying friends, and then begin and go to the second comma, or the second punctuation mark. So friends, Romans, and then you begin again and go to the third punctuation, friends, Romans, countrymen, and then again, friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears, and continue, and just repeat over and over and over again until they really have it down.
Okay, do you find this successful with most of the kids?
We have. I've been doing this for years now, and we do. I have poetry that's from the very first day of school until the very last day of school. We do poetry weekly all year long, and I really haven't had any kids. We do have some students who might have learning disabilities. They're not able to memorize things very well, but other than that, all of the kids are able to accomplish large chunks of memorization of poetry or different parts of stories.
So what's the longest poem they'll memorize?
I think the longest poem that I have the kids memorize is The Walrus and the Carpenter by Lewis Carroll. And the kids usually approach that as I pass it out. They're saying, "Oh my goodness, Mr. Faulk, that's so long. How are we going to do this?" And I say, "Well, you know what? This is actually going to be the easiest poem to do because it's such a fun story." And the kids actually, without much work, the kids have the poem down. So
that's amazing. That's amazing. I had a delightful experience a little while ago with my own kids. My elderly aunt was with us for dinner. She's almost 80. And one of my kids spontaneously started reciting from the Jabberwocky. Okay. And then she joined in. Okay. And they kind of did the Jabberwocky together, even though the kids hadn't done it for years, and she hadn't done it for a long, long time. But right. The retention of memory is just amazing.
Yeah. Well, it comes with practice.
Okay, so you've introduced the poem to them, at least the opening part. And then you've taught them how to memorize it on their own for homework. And now comes time for recitation. So how does that work? Recitation, grading, that part of it.
Okay, so the kids are given a poem at the beginning of each week, and they have a week to work on that segment of memorization. So in that, after we have that introduction, they basically have those 7 days. And 7 days later, they come in, and I have them, student by student, coming up to the front of the classroom to recite their segment of poetry. If it's a multi-week poem, so for instance, let me say The Walrus and the Carpenter, which goes on for a few weeks, what happens is, since each of them have their own copy, I ask them to give me their copy, let's say the first week and on until we finish the recitation. And each week I mark where their mistakes are as they start the recitation. For each mistake that they make, and that begins anew every week, for each mistake they make, I take off 1 out of 25 points. So if they say, for instance, in Friends, Romans, Countrymen, if they're starting off and they forget the first part and they're like, people that I like, Romans, countrymen. So that first part where they miss the word friends, that would be a -1.
Okay.
And so that's -1 out of 25 points, and then I multiply that by 4 to get for it to be out of 100 points.
Challenging, huh?
Yeah, it is. So normally if they have 10 mistakes, that's the point where I usually say, I'm sorry, you don't have this memorized, you have to continue to work on this. But I rarely have that problem with the kids getting their homework done on time. So,
and you use a poetry recitation chart. How does that work? That's on the wall, I see.
Right. So I have our standard poems that we're supposed to memorize every week, or that we work on throughout the year. And for each stanza that the kids memorize, or a group of 4 lines, if a poem or something is not broken up into stanzas, or if they're really long stanzas, an 8-line stanza, what I do is I divide each of those stanzas up into about 4 lines, and I give them a point, which goes onto a chart. Each of the students' names is on there, and for each stanza that we memorize in class, they receive a point. If we were just to count those points up that we do in the class, it would be under 100 stanzas for the year. And I encourage the kids to memorize as much as they can. So we do the poems that we recite the poems that I have for their homework, but then they're also encouraged to do extra poems.
Oh, good.
And
Yeah.
I have
my son really liked to do that. For extra poems.
They have volumes of poetry in the classroom.
So they can get ahead on the chart.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what they do is after we do the recitation of our regular work, then I just say, does anybody have any extra poems that they want to recite? And as long as it's appropriate for their age level, I count it as, and I give it credit, and I keep track on my own personal chart about who the student is, what the poem is that they're doing for extra credit, and then I give them a tally mark on their stanza chart in their place, and if they get up to 100 points by the end of the year, I buy them a little gift and stuff. so it's not so much that they're competing against each other in the classroom, although that may be the case. Yeah. They're really competing against themselves.
They got their eye on the prize.
Yeah, they have their eye on the prize, hopefully. And
so I wanted to ask you, you mentioned that you sometimes have children learning difficulties. This whole process is harder for them. What benefits do you think they get from this?
That's a good question. Many times, well, I mean, I have had some kids in my class who are not able to do memorization because they actually have some mental, disability, which, impedes them from actually retaining something in their mind for very long. And so, so with the parents' permission, I reduce the amount of work that they have to do. Okay. Now, when it comes to some of these poems, they may not be able to do it, and they aren't able to do it, but just the fact that they're there in the classroom, listening to these poems being recited by their classmates over and over and over again, they're still getting the heart and the meaning of what these poems are, or these elements of literature that
which are so important, part of our whole Western Christian tradition.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Okay, so this poetic recitation, a lot of the examples that you're taking for them to memorize are from the Greeks, the foundation of our Western civilization. You also have other tools that you can use in teaching them about that civilization and getting them excited about it. The children's Homer, Dalaire's Book of Greek Myths, the famous men of Greece. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us how you use those?
Yes, I definitely can. The Delaire's book of Greek myths, I use. We don't read through the whole book with a class, and I don't assign readings to go through that section, just because I feel like we have the study of Greece is and the Greek culture is so expansive, and we have so many materials to use. I can't I can't have the kids read through that whole book. At least that's what I don't. I don't do that in my classroom. So what I do is we read through. They definitely need the stories of all of the gods and goddesses, just to have in their memory, so that they can actually see where we're going to be going when we actually start dealing with some real Greek history. Mm-hmm. So what I do is we start going through the family tree of the Delaire's Greek myths, and I take them through, where Cronus and the Titans came from, and then eventually where Zeus and the gods on the 12 thrones on Mount Olympus came from. And we go through the family tree, etc. We break it all down. And then after the family tree, the next chapter begins with Hera, the wife of Zeus. And that's where I stop it with the class. And then I say, okay, kids, we're going to go ahead and write reports on these different Greek god and goddesses. And they have to choose to be one of the gods or the goddesses.
Okay.
And to actually do the story in first person. So, for instance, at our school, we also we just finished doing a presentation on the saints for All Saints Day, the eve of All Saints Day, and so the kids have to dress up like saints. They do reports in first person. So I am Saint Joseph, the husband of Mary, etc. And so now, with that same idea of the report, we're using that same structure more or less in our class to do the Greek gods and goddesses. Okay. So I'll have one of the girls in the class will be Hera. So I am Hera, daughter of Cronus, wife to Zeus. Mm-hmm. I sit on the throne, etc.
Very good.
So.
And how about the famous men of Greece?
Famous men of Greece. That goes into much more of the history of Greece, mm-hmm. which I think is really important for the kids to get. So I kind of, since we're doing so much of the mythology in the Delaire's Greek myths, I kind of skim through the first few chapters of the famous men of Greece, which goes through Deucalion on the flood, and it also speaks about the Iliad and the Odyssey. So we go through that, but I go through it rather quickly, and then it really begins with where the Greek culture came from. And now with the rest of that book, I really read it in depth with a class. Okay. We take notes, or at least what I do is since the book focuses on the famous men of Greece, I take each of the men from there, and I write a little sentence or so about each of those people, which then I have the kids memorize, so they can actually go back and say, so
I remember him. This is what I wrote. This is the particular thing.
Yeah, exactly. Good. So who was Socrates? Who was Aristotle? Who was all the different Greeks that came up in that book.
Great. So. Now you told me that learning to do this was not a part of your teacher education process.
No, it was
that you kind of came into it when you started teaching at St. Augustine's. Mm-hmm. Do you have any words of encouragement for those like you who sort of are coming into it new and fresh as a teacher?
Words of encouragement, yes. It is wonderful when the kids see the stories. When they see the stories of these ancient peoples that came before us, they get excited about it. Mm-hmm. I mean, I as a teacher get excited about it, and we all know that for the kids to be for the learning to be fruitful and good, they need to be excited about what they're doing, and they love to hear the stories. That's the most important part, is getting those stories, and it's where our founding fathers got everything that they knew came from came from the history of these peoples. So we, if we want to continue to follow in the shoes of our founding fathers here in our nation, in America, and even in our faith, as Catholics, as Christians, we need to know, where our roots lie in culture.
All right, very good. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Hello, I'm Dr. Andrew Seeley. I'm the director of the Institute for Catholic Liberal Education, and this is School Talk. And today we're going to be talking with Michael Van Hecke. He is the president of the Institute, but also a longtime headmaster for the last 14 years at St. Augustine Academy in Ventura, California. And he's counseled many other schools and headmasters about how to form a school in which Catholic identity is strongly lived throughout the community. So we're going to talk about that, and we're going to start with talking about faculty formation. How do you form a community that lives and breathes their Catholic faith?
Well, what's grown up to loom large in importance over the last 20-some years I've been doing this, it becomes more and more apparent that the only answer lies in relationship. And it's pretty obvious when you look back at the ministry of Christ. It's all based on relationship. Everything, the incarnation, he came to have relationship, and by relationship win us to heaven. So I've seen in the whole educational model that when you start and finish based on relationship, that's when you can make the inroads. So what I do with my schools is there's basically three components of teacher formation, and one is the intellectual formation. We have to know what we're doing. Second, I will call relationship formation, because that's very, very essential for the community nature of what a school is. And then third, certainly not least, we don't want to put faith formation least. I actually move it to last here because it's something that I think we don't understand well enough. And so I'd like to talk about that at some length, but the faith formation, I'm not putting it as an add-on. But it's those three things.
Okay, so intellectual formation. Give an example of
intellectual formation. In my position, I'm the headmaster, right? So ideally I'm the head of the masters of each of the subjects. So I should be an academic leader, and we talk about that. You hear it in the education schools that you are the principal educator of the school. Well, in our school, it really is that way, and I think all of the whole Catholic school system is built with that ideal, in a way that, it's uniquely beautiful that we can become a true leader in our community, intellectually, morally, in all those ways. So what I see first, that was a little bit of a diversion, but to get to this one point, first and foremost, it's me that needs to grow intellectually. And as I do, I can teach my faculty, I can teach the children, I understand so much more, right? So we need to grow ourselves and our faculty intellectually. So we study the subject matter that's before us. We study things about the history of education, say classical education. What are those elements that were so much a foundation of our own culture, Western civilization, and the history of Catholic education. So all this intellectual development going up, and the interdepartmental understandings of what everyone is doing.
Okay. Okay, so can you tell us more about the relationship aspect of formation?
Yes, I learned a lot from some friends in Dallas, Dr. and Mrs. Ruth Rawlin Lassiter. And they had thought a lot about this. They'd written about it. And as I started to mature in my headmastership and directing communities, I came quickly to see the importance of the relationship. It made me understand Christ better, ultimately. But what we do with the faculty then, and what I hope to gain with the faculty, is that we become together a community of learners. And we do this in hard intellectual pursuits, in casual conversations. One of my favorite things to do is just the dinner. The faculty loves to have dinner together. We do that a few times a year. Sometimes it's potluck, sometimes I'll cook them a big feast. Lunches in the teacher's lounge together. During our summer faculty meetings, I always take them out to a restaurant where we have a nice lunch and some wine, and it's just it's relaxing, it's enjoyable. It really bonds us as friends.
And I know as a parent, the community, the strength of the community at St. Augustine's is really palpable. One of the things that first struck me when I brought my children there the first day, dropping them off, was the joy of being together.
Yeah.
Teachers and students. It was really wonderful.
Yeah, well, that's what we have to give them. Again, going back to what I've seen and felt about the importance of relationship. If a relationship isn't built on joy and really glued together with that understanding, that give and take, but always a joy surrounding it, it's going to be a flat relationship. It's going to be functional. It's going to be mechanical, and I don't know. That's the kind of school I grew up in.
So what about?
I don't want that.
What about faith formation?
Faith formation is, that's so ill understood. It is really ill understood. Archbishop Michael Miller gave a talk a few years ago at a conference we had on Catholic identity. And he absolutely nailed it. But he used the word Christian anthropology all the time. Okay. And that's not a word that's really understood. But as he went through his talk, he described what it meant. And basically it's this. We're children of God. Right? We're children of God. And so if that's true, everything we do, everything we study, everything the way we see everything, it's all different. It's all different. If we stick ourselves in this again, let me use the term flat world, right? If we stick ourselves in this three-dimensional mechanistic realm, the end comes pretty quick.
Right. So how do you live the faith together as a faculty?
Well, that's a great question, and that's multifaceted. We start every day with the morning prayer, and what we do as a faculty, for years we've prayed the Shorter Christian Prayer Book. So we start with morning prayer. Now recently we've added we've actually replaced that. We've replaced it with the Magnificat.
Yeah, it's a great publication.
It is a beautiful publication. It's a beautiful publication. And it not only has morning prayer, it has the Mass prayers, it has evening prayer, it has endless meditations, stories of saints, artwork, all of this material that's educating us all. Now, collectively, we're educating ourselves first thing in the morning. But as the days go on, and the weeks go on, and the years go on, we're educating ourselves in all these many splendid beauties of the church, of history, of our brother saints. It's really becoming in a very short amount of time, it's becoming a great tool for us in our own faith formation.
And have you noticed, how have you seen your faculty developing over the years?
Well,
And the reason I ask is, if somebody's going to start this process, how long a process do you think this is? How does it unfold?
It takes a while.
Okay.
It takes a while to build a family, right? And that's really what we're doing. We're building a certain kind of family for service to the church, for service to God, in service to the families that come to us at the school. So it takes time to build the relationship amongst us as faculty. It takes time to grow in a similar language of the faith, of the intellectual material that we're studying. It takes time.
How much time?
Give me killing me.
No, give me an off the cuff.
Okay, I would say.
What's the plan? So many year plan.
Here's my experience, real quickly. About 5 years.
5 years. Okay.
About 5 years. Yeah. In the few schools that I've run, it's about 5 years to where the faculty has come to know each other well enough, and of course some people aren't interested in it and they leave. So through that attrition, new people come in, and they determine pretty quickly whether they want to be part of this family. So 5 years.
All right. Okay. Okay, so when you're at a school like yours, I suppose this is true even of larger schools, you get different kinds of teachers coming in new. So talk to me about that. Let's say, what do you do with a student right out of college who's, say, a liberal arts graduate, doesn't have the teacher training? What kinds of difficulties do you anticipate they might have that you can help them through? How do you help them through that first year or two?
Okay. I think I can talk to it relatively well, because I've failed so often. A new teacher coming in, I started teaching as a new teacher out of a liberal arts college and had no training, no guidance, no mentoring, anything. I was just thrown into the pot and made a lot of mistakes myself. And then a couple of years later, when I started my master's in education, I went to, in the batch of courses, there was one course that was profoundly helpful.
Okay.
And the way I describe it is I say, that gave me the science of teaching.
Okay, what course was it?
The title of the course?
Oh,
I
no,
don't know,
no.
but I can tell you exactly what it did.
Okay.
It taught me how to spend 45 minutes in a classroom.
Okay.
That's the science of what I have to do. It's the hard and fast rules. Okay, you come in, you spend a couple minutes, you get the kids on your agenda, you the old saying, tell them what you're going to teach them, and tell them what you taught them.
Okay.
So they're kind of commonsensical, but when you're young, you're coming out of college.
You're kind of enthusiastic.
You're enthusiastic, and you're very enthusiastic about the material.
Yeah.
Right. And I've had young teachers and older teachers who are second career type of thing. They're very enthusiastic about history or science, and they'll come and they just want to go gangbusters with the kids on the material, but there's something else going on here than just the presentation of the material. So what I learned was how to organize and order a classroom. Assessment is entirely it's ethereal for a new teacher. What is it? What do you mean assessment? I can give them a test, I can give them this, that. But are you really assessing what they've learned? And are you assessing it the proper way, at the proper level? A sixth grader studying physical science is going to be different than a senior studying physics. So we don't want to underdo it, we don't want to overdo it. That's the science side of.
And you mentor them?
Not only I do, but there's usually a faculty member. We'll assign a faculty member to meet with them pretty regularly. And then one of the things I've learned through my mistakes is I need to work with them. I need to call them in every week or two. And even if it's a 3 or 4 minute chat, how you doing? How's the class going? I always now ask to look at some of their quizzes and tests, just to get a sense of how they're producing them and what they're asking. The biggest mistake I've made was just letting them go. And then they're months down the road developing certain habits which aren't necessarily healthy for them as teachers. And now I try to stay much more on top of it. And it's good for them. It's good for the kids. It's good for the school.
Okay, very good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so with many of the schools we've been working with, they're facing declining enrollment. And one of the things they're trying to do to address that, as well as just to address the bishop's mandates and things like that, is to increase their Catholic identity, to make their school more distinctively Catholic, so that parents have a reason to make the sacrifices necessary to keep their kids in a Catholic school. So what do you see as important aspects of Catholic identity at St. Augustine's that other schools could benefit from?
I was actually talking about this with the head of the Children's Scholarship Fund in New York City last year. And she was saying that that's one of the big concerns, is they're raising money to give poor kids a chance in the Catholic schools. And the question comes up for these families, are they even willing to pay a little bit? Because is the Catholic school really different? And so she's looking for answers, as we are across the nation in diocesan offices and parishes, etc. And there is an answer, and Catholic identity has really picked up. All of a sudden, that's what we're all talking about in the business. In the Western Educational Catholic Association, where 1,000 Catholic schools are accredited, Catholic identity is now one of the accreditation factors. So we as schools have to show that we are increasing our Catholic identity, that we're really molding our school around this as important. There's really two things that we do at St. Augustine Academy that I think they derive from the understanding that Catholic identity means that we're Catholic. More than that, it means that we're children of God. Okay, as we are in this world, we're children of our intellectual heritage, and as things go, we're more affected by those who are more proximate. So, as good as Aristotle and Aquinas were, who's having a little bit more effect on us? It's Marx and Nietzsche. And so their idea is, well, we're workers, so we need to prepare ourselves to work. We need to prepare ourselves to be powerful. We need to prepare ourselves
That's the governing view of the Common Core state standards.
It is. And it's the governing view of our society, really. So that's kind of what we're looking at on the landscape. And yet when you bring Catholic identity in to the mix, well, all that worker stuff, all that power, I'm going to be in power so I can control, so I can run, whatever, that's all limited to this world. And when we bring the divine into it, we blow the roof off, we blow the doors out, everything is possible, everything is open. So true understanding of Catholic identity, we see everything in a different light. We see it in such a greater light, with so much more freedom. I read in the Magnificat this morning something about how we think of freedom as an iron cage. Freedom, we think of God's will as an iron cage.
Oh, okay,
yeah,
thank you. I was a little
confused. We think of God's will as an iron cage, but it's the opposite of that. God's will for us, when we follow it, makes us more than we can even imagine. What it does is it makes us what God imagines for us. So you can see how we've gone beyond 3 dimensions to the supernatural dimension. At St. Augustine, we do that a couple ways in particular. One is we look back to those first liberal arts of grammar, logic, and rhetoric, and those become the foundation upon which we do all of our subjects. So we're doing math, we're doing history, we do English, all these things, but we're doing them in order to teach students how to know, how to think, how to discuss. It's a very different approach than, if you will, the standards-based approach, where you've got to get through all of the check marks. The other thing we do is we provide a culture. We develop a culture. And the culture, again, it derives from our faith. It derives from Western civilization. And one thing that we do in particular at our school, I had a visitor from a large Orange County high school yesterday, and he happened to come up and attend Mass with us. At our school, we sing. We teach all the students to sing. So every day we divide them up into 4 parts. We take middle school girls, middle school boys, high school girls, and they all practice their parts. And then, periodically they come together to put it together and work it and tweak it. But what's happening over days, weeks, years, the kids are getting these great works of music into their souls. A couple years ago, I was out working in the orchard, and I hate to admit this, but my daughter was singing Taylor Swift on the patio, pool deck. And so I just, my father's heart sinks, and I tried. But lo and behold, a minute later, she's singing Ave Verum Corpus. It was beautiful. Yeah. So, there's a battle. There's a battle going on. And the reality is what we're doing is we're giving a kid, we're giving them a soldier in the battle. See, how many of us don't even bother? And so the children are walking out there, walking into one culture, but they've never been exposed to a different culture. Yeah. They've never been exposed to a culture that really is it's Catholic identity incarnated, right? So that's what we try to give them, and it's working. It's lovely.
So we want to make sure we're not looking at the students as future workers. We're looking at them as children of God. And we're forming a culture by immersing them in Catholic culture and then giving them the tools to express it themselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Two things I've seen at St. Augustine's are very powerful that way. One was the institution of the Classics Day. I guess you do it each year. The Classics Day, the Medieval Day.
Right.
That was such an amazing event to be able to witness. And then the valedictorian addresses. I've been so impressed by what your students, your graduates what's gotten into their heart and how deeply they're able to express it, and how they to be a Catholic is just, it's just so natural and beautiful for them.
Yeah, it is rather lovely to hear a senior in high school talk about Dante.
Yeah.
Like they sort of know it.
Well, and like it matters.
Like it matters.
Yeah.
It says something about their life and about their future, about their goals, about their destiny. Yeah.
Okay, and then what about teachers who've had a lot of experience but in a more traditional setting or a more contemporary setting? How do you bring them into your school where Catholic identity is so prominent, where relationship is so important?
Well, we've talked about the science of teaching, but there's also the art of teaching. And I think one of the things that we find in our modern teacher formation programs is a lot of attention to the science. Our educational system has, for lack of a better term, become a standards-based education. So we're used to we've got to meet the checklist. We've got to meet the checklist. And that's what we're doing. We're teaching to it. We're testing to it, blah, blah, blah. And yet, we know from understanding the history of education, I recently, this last year, came across a book, The 7 Laws of Teaching. And it's a superb book. Apparently it's making a big comeback too.
I enjoy it.
I was reading it and thought, this is really good, but it's the language is a little funny. I came across it on Amazon, Kindle, right? And so I thought it was one of the new books that I've been reading with some of the charter school storybooks and these kinds of things. Nope. This was from the 1800s. Right. But it's a superb book, The 7 Laws of Teaching. And what he goes back to again and again is that the teacher has to make this connection, almost soul to soul with the child. When they get that connection, then the teacher knows the child. They know what's going on in their head. They know how to reach them. I don't want to wear the word out, but it really goes back to a certain kind of relationship that has to occur in a class. And the teacher's got to be keenly aware of what's going on. You've got to step away from the standards and a term you use, teach from the point of rest. Yeah. It's a beautiful term.
That's the one we got from Cersei.
Yeah, and that's something that I work with my more experienced teachers, or the teachers that have just come through the standard teacher formation programs.
Now, do you see that also connected with, say, a virtue development approach, where what you want to be seeing is the development of the virtues and the strengths and the capabilities in the students more than what you're going to be getting back on the test?
I'm not sure the question.
Whether, when you're talking about relationship,
yeah,
and getting to see the soul of the child, moving away from the standards-based approach, you want to see how what you're doing with them in their time in the classroom is developing their character,
right.
And their intellectual habits, the things they take joy in, that kind of thing.
That's what happens. I mean, and when you work with these teachers who they've been doing it, more of the public school manner or the teacher training program manner, you have to work against that grain of the standards. You have to tell them, relax, just relax. And we've seen this from teachers that have come to the conferences or academic retreats. They feel like a weight has been lifted off their shoulders.
Yeah.
They're now free, right?
That's so wonderful to hear from the teachers that just enter into a
Yeah. And so all that they know is right that's written on their heart. Now they're allowed to live. Yeah. And the teachers that I've had that have taught for 5, 10, 20, 30 years, when they start teaching in this kind of school, they just become happy. And what more can we give kids than the joy of learning? Right?
Very good. Okay. Okay, so with many of the schools we've been working with, they're facing declining enrollment. And one of the things they're trying to do to address that, as well as just to address the bishop's mandates and things like that, is to increase their Catholic identity, to make their school more distinctively Catholic, so that parents have a reason to make the sacrifices necessary to keep their kids in a Catholic school. So what do you see as important aspects of Catholic identity at St. Augustine's that other schools could benefit from?
I was actually talking about this with the head of the Children's Scholarship Fund in New York City last year. And she was saying that that's one of the big concerns, is they're raising money to give poor kids a chance in the Catholic schools. And the question comes up for these families, are they even willing to pay a little bit? Because is the Catholic school really different? And so she's looking for answers, as we are across the nation in diocesan offices and parishes, etc. And there is an answer, and Catholic identity has really picked up. All of a sudden, that's what we're all talking about in the business. In the Western Educational Catholic Association, where 1,000 Catholic schools are accredited,
Wow.
Catholic identity is now one of the accreditation factors. So we as schools have to show that we are increasing our Catholic identity, that we're really molding our school around this as important. There's really two things that we do at St. Augustine Academy that I think they derive from the understanding that Catholic identity means that we're Catholic. Mm-hmm. More than that, it means that we're children of God. Okay, as we are in this world, we're children of our intellectual heritage, and as things go, we're more affected by those who are more proximate. Mm-hmm. So, as good as Aristotle and Aquinas were, who's having a little bit more effect on us? It's Marx and Nietzsche. Mm-hmm. And so their idea is, well, we're workers, so we need to prepare ourselves to work. We need to prepare ourselves to be powerful. We need to prepare ourselves to
That's the governing view of the Common Core state standards.
It is. And it's the governing view of our society, really. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what we're looking at on the landscape. And yet when you bring Catholic identity in to the mix, well, all that worker stuff, all that power, I'm going to be in power so I can control, so I can run, whatever, that's all limited to this world. Mm-hmm. And when we bring the divine into it, we blow the roof off, we blow the doors out, everything is possible, everything is open. Mm-hmm. So true understanding of Catholic identity, we see everything in a different light. We see it in such a greater light, with so much more freedom. I read in the Magnificat this morning something about how we think of freedom as an iron cage. Freedom, we think of God's will as an iron cage.
Oh, okay,
yeah,
thank you.
I was a little confused. We think of God's will as an iron cage, but it's the opposite of that. Mm-hmm. God's will for us, when we follow it, makes us more than we can even imagine. What it does is it makes us what God imagines for us. Mm-hmm. So you can see how we've gone beyond 3 dimensions to the supernatural dimension. Mm-hmm. At St. Augustine, we do that a couple ways in particular. One is we look back to those first liberal arts of grammar, logic, and rhetoric, and those become the foundation upon which we do all of our subjects. So we're doing math, we're doing history, we do English, all these things. But we're doing them in order to teach students how to know, how to think, how to discuss. It's a very different approach than, if you will, a standards-based approach, where you've got to get through all of the check marks. The other thing we do is we provide a culture. We develop a culture. Mm-hmm. And the culture, again, it derives from our faith. It derives from Western civilization. And one thing that we do in particular at our school, I had a visitor from a large Orange County high school yesterday, and he happened to come up and attend Mass with us. At our school, we sing. We teach all the students to sing. So every day we divide them up into 4 parts. We take middle school girls, middle school boys, high school girls, and they all practice their parts. And then periodically they come together to put it together and work it and tweak it. But what's happening over days, weeks, years, the kids are getting these great works of music into their souls. A couple years ago, I was out working in the orchard. I hate to admit this, but my daughter was singing Taylor Swift on the pool deck.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just, my father's heart sinks, and I tried. But lo and behold, a minute later, she's singing Ave Verum Corpus. It was beautiful.
Yeah.
So, there's a battle. There's a battle going on.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is what we're doing is we're giving a kid, we're giving him a soldier in the battle.
Okay.
See, how many of us don't even bother? And so the children are walking out there, walking into one culture, but they've never been exposed to a different culture.
Yeah.
They've never been exposed to a culture that really is, it's Catholic identity incarnated,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we try to give them, and it's working. It's lovely.
So we want to make sure we're not looking at the students as future workers. We're looking at them as children of God. And we're forming a culture by immersing them in Catholic culture and then giving them the tools to express it themselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Two things I've seen at St. Augustine's are very powerful that way. One was the institution of the Classics Day. I guess you do a different one each year.
Uh-huh.
The Classics Day, the Medieval Day.
Right.
That was such an amazing event to be able to witness. And then the valedictorian addresses. I've been so impressed by what your students, your graduates are, what's gotten into their heart,
Mm-hmm.
and how deeply they're able to express it, and how they to be a Catholic is just, it's just so natural and beautiful for them.
Yeah, it is rather lovely to hear a senior in high school talk about Dante.
Yeah.
Like they sort of know it.
Well, and then
like
it matters.
Like it matters.
Yeah.
It says something about their life and about their future, about their goals, about their destiny.
Yeah. Okay. So it's been wonderful for us as parents and even me as a teacher from time to time to be a part of the St. Augustine community. It is a small school. It's an independent school, though now you are working within the Archdiocesan system.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you see this? How can larger schools, how can other schools in the Catholic system learn from your experience?
Well, I think the more that we all can do, us as an institute, us as individuals, and throughout the dioceses and whatnot, the more they can come to understand the whole impact of Catholic identity. Instead of just us using this word
Mm-hmm.
and putting a crucifix up on the wall, the more we can understand what it says to us philosophically in our vision of the world, the more it will change everything that is being done in a school. Mm-hmm. The gentleman that saw me yesterday from a large boys' high school, he said what they started this year was they started compulsory music classes for their freshmen. Mm-hmm. And of course it was,
how can we do that?
and now just a few months in, the boys they're shocked because all of a sudden they produce this little bit of music in harmony, and it sounded really good. Mm-hmm. And so these little things, they can be done in big schools, they can be done in little schools. Right. They can have a powerful impact. What we have to, maybe better to say, stop doing, is thinking that we have to be like the neighborhood school. Yeah. There's a canon law that I think is often misinterpreted or misapplied. And that states that the Catholic school has to be as good, at least as good, as the neighborhood school. Mm-hmm. So what canon law says there is, we don't want you to have a Catholic school and not really teach the kids. Well, of course. Right. But you look at the statistics, the Catholic schools, blow the doors off of the government schools all the time. Mm-hmm. And so we don't have to worry about playing catch up or trying to be like them. We've got it. We've got it in spades. So what we have to do is not think that we're the ugly foster brother or whatever it is. We have to do what we're about. In the Holy See's teaching on Catholic schools, Archbishop Miller, he works his way to this quote from Corinthians. It's really beautiful. He says, if Catholic educators, parents, and others who dedicate themselves to this apostolate fail to keep in mind a high supernatural vision, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Let's not compare ourselves to the public school's chemistry lab.
Mm-hmm.
We need the high supernatural vision. First off, we're going to do a better job in chemistry. Well, then all the talk about Catholic schools, if we're not keeping this high supernatural vision, all this talk about Catholic schools will be no more than a gong booming or a cymbal clashing. Mm-hmm. See, the schools will then become empty. They'll become without purpose. Mm-hmm. And then people won't understand why they have to pay tuition, why they would want to send their child to a public school.
And that's why I've always thought that this whole transformation process starts with the teachers.
It does.
Starts with the teachers saying, I want to learn my Catholic faith. I want to learn about the riches of Catholic culture. I want to learn about how my subject is opening up the minds of students and my mind to what's true, good, and beautiful.
Yeah.
And to take advantage. There's so much even in normal secular materials that you can take advantage of if you have that thirst and that sense in yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So. Okay, well, thank you, Mike, and
All right.
I hope this has been helpful for all of you.
Thank you.